diving into these coaching press conferences. We're going to try to hit on some of the key takeaways from the coaching staff press conferences that we got. Really focus on kind of the new guys stepping in. We do have some guys like changing positions. David Correo, Scotty Montgomery going to the receiver position. So we got a little bit of that. Start with the offensive coordinator. So we got to hear from John Morton. I think this is the first time we've gotten to hear from John Morton. I think the first time we saw him was in like the little highlight clips they put together from rookie minicamp. But I think this is the first time we're hearing from the Lions' new offensive coordinator, which fired me up when I saw that was posted. So we have to start with this first and kind of what he said. And then also we got to hear from David Shaw, which is fantastic, working with the offense this season as well. We all seen the little quote. If you haven't, the Lions put it up on X. Like, yeah, we're not going to change too much because, it's worked, right? But essentially he's like, yeah, we're going to add some of the things, that I like, maybe some of the concepts that I like specifically. And, depending on how the players can kind of grasp that as well. Say that he would have to learn some of the situational things working with Dan Campbell, especially with the aggression that he has. I don't think that's going to be an issue for John Morton. It also just makes sense. It's like, yeah, that's game by game, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's going to be an issue with John Morton. Whenever I would watch John Morton's offenses in the past, I always felt like there was an aggression level to those offenses. They never felt very conservative. So I don't think that's going to be any issue whatsoever. Is he willing to throw the ball in 4th and 3? Like, yeah, this guy is going to be aggressive. The one thing that I go back to there, David Shaw brought up the John Gruden coaching staff specifically. Learning kind of the West Coast system from him and his version of it. And, they kind of branched off and did their own things, and how David Shaw was basically coaching like an NFL team at the college level. Like little things that always come to mind when I hear stuff like that is, like the 3rd and 6s. And it's not just like about being aggressive. It's like the football intelligence that we had as a team, as a unit, right? As a collective, where like you would get in situations like that and the Lions could just like run the football, and how smart that play calling was, and how that was actually something that was kind of unique to us. You think aggression, you're thinking you got to throw the football, that kind of thing, but like it wasn't that. It was actually the opposite, but it was aggressive, but it was just such a smart way to be aggressive. And it was almost aggressive in its own sense, because it was like, yeah, you're running the ball. That's not supposed to be what you do here, but it works because it's kind of outside of the box a little bit. So those are the kind of things that I hope to see continue, not kind of closing yourself into a box of how it has to look because this is the down and distance, just little things like that. And here's like some interesting nuggets that I'll give. Let's actually go right there to David Shaw, because he, to me, was the most intriguing press conference. He talked about his time having 12 years with Stanford. He said he never took an NFL interview, which I didn't know that. That's crazy. I knew there was interest. Amy, he did a really good job with Stanford. Some down years, I think, there towards the end, but he did a really good job there. So surprising to hear that. And his plan was not originally to do that, but he got the opportunity with Harbaugh at the time, got the job with Stanford, so he decided to just stick there, and he just ended up staying there for as long as he did, became the head coach, as we know, and they won a lot. They were really successful. So it makes some sense. But he always had wanted to come back to the NFL. He said he ran his style offensively and defensively like an NFL team. He said it was a Vic Fangio type of defense. One year they were able to get Vic Fangio in there, and then offensively, again, it was more of an NFL-styled offense. Said over the last 3 years, he had really watched a lot of the Lions offensively, seen what they have done. So this is where he ultimately wanted to end up, is back in an NFL team. But I think when he started to kind of go through how, they both come from kind of that John Gruden era, the West Coast style back then, even though I don't want to like put a label on what our offense is going to be, that kind of thing. But I think like an interesting little nugget that I kind of like went down this little rabbit hole, and I was like, this is interesting. Him bringing up John Gruden. John Gruden's last spot as a coach was with the New Orleans Saints, or not a coach, sorry, but his last spot in the NFL was with the New Orleans Saints. He was actually a consultant brought in 2023 to help with their offense and what that was going to look like, the transitions they were making at that time. It was still Derek Carr at that time. They were changing some things up offensively, some of that New Orleans Saints offense. And you just watched the way that they played. They weren't like overly successful, but you could see that there was a step up in kind of how they performed that season. But you go back to that and you look at their style offensively, and one thing that connected was how much emphasis there was on all 11 guys being on the same page. And we had heard this from both the offense and defensive side, how, we're not just coaching groups, we're trying to have this like all-inclusive type of like, hey, man, if we're coaching something, everybody's got to understand what's going on because the game will slow down. We had multiple coaches bring that up, right? Like that's how their approach is to it, right? We don't want to just kind of make segments of rooms. And such a big part of that Saints offense back in 2023 was that as well, where it was, hey, everybody's on the same page. We all have to understand, like, let's say, for example, what the coverage is in, because if we all understand what the coverage is in, then we all can get to a different look offensively, essentially, not by like audibling necessarily at the snap. Maybe it would be that, but it's also post snap. Like things are going to change post snap. So how can we get to the right positioning post snap as a unit versus against what we're seeing as a whole? And I think when you kind of go into that whole outlook of what the New Orleans Saints ended up looking like in 2022, And I think the Lions have clearly had that as well. You think about what the Saints valued at that time and kind of what we've always seen from that style of offense, which is, the versatility offensively, obviously looking for really smart players that can line up in different spots. For them, it was a lot of the outside rushing, which could be a little different. We know that's actually carried over for the last couple of years. That's Clint Kubiak, who's now the offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks. It was that element. And even some of the concepts that you'll see, you're like, all right, I kind of remember some of the Lions will do things like this, right? Everybody's got concepts that they'll do that every team will run, right, for the most part, right? You got your spacing concepts, you got your dagger concepts, but then there's a little nuggets. Like we throw a third guy underneath that'll kind of run the little hook route so he can kind of pull coverage, and we'll just kind of create an unbalanced look here. And then like looks like this one. So we get a cover 3 defensively, right? Safeties don't roll at the snap, so it's straightforward. It's cover 3, single high safety. And they would run things like, all right, let's say everybody's going to 4 verts. But the key that stuck out to me was it wasn't your typical like, hey, 2x2 formation. It wasn't, a shotgun twins, both sides. Like it wasn't that. Instead, it was actually just like, hey, running back and tight end are going to run the verticals. He's going to get an outside go route or maybe even closer to a fade. Then we're going to have the running back actually attack the seam. On the backside, the twins receivers are actually just going to run 2 verts like you typically would in a 4 verticals concept. But the uniqueness to that, to be able to go at the snap, see that defensively, like, hey, this is what can attack this type of coverage. And it doesn't have to come from like, we came out there, we had the exact alignment to run this. It's like, no, we had the versatility to run it. We had the pieces to do it. So like the port, the gives, that kind of thing. But then also all being on the same page to the extent where you're capable of doing something like that, where you're capable of all seeing it and being able to get on the same page. And that's kind of an example that I think of. And the Lions, they had things like that a couple years ago when he was here, right? He was here a couple years ago with John Morton, and some of the concepts that we had back then, some of them kind of went away after Morton left. He did say that, he had an input in implementing some of these things that, still happening with the Lions. And there was some of that. There's some stuff that carried over, some stuff that we don't really do that much anymore. I can remember, and we were a different team roster-wise, but I could always remember like the examples of where Jason Cabinda was out there running vertical routes, and you're watching, you're like, what are we doing? Like Jason Cabinda running a go ball is probably not the move. I don't think he's ever going to get the football, and I don't think he ever did. I'm pretty sure he never did. But like that example gave me the memory of what, like, oh, okay, this is like what the Saints did, and this is kind of like what we did as well. Like I could see those things carry over. Like the whole idea of the timing offense, right? You're working through play action, all that stuff. I expect all that to stay the same, right? You still have to be able to run the ball. It has to start up front. All the emphasis there. Like enamored by Jamison Williams and how he's basically taken off. He did say that this would be a Jamison Williams breakout year, which I do anticipate. And again, that is to me some of that schematic, because I think schematically he's going to get more vertical opportunities than he's had in the past. I like the things that I brought this up before, especially like over this past season. But I really like the things this past season that the Lions did route running wise, the routes that they put on his plate to really maximize Jamison Williams and, kind of play into his strengths as a route runner, right? Not ask him to do things that he just wasn't as comfortable with. But at the same time, I do think that we're going to have, just a more heavier implementation of it. We're going to get this guy over top. So him saying that, I just think it speaks to necessarily, the growth that he's seen from the guy when he got there as a rookie versus where he is now. He didn't really see him as a rookie. But then also, I think part of that is like, I do believe that's going to happen. I just think that's a huge part of this offense. At that time, we had different guys that would take the top off. It wasn't J-Mo, but now it's going to be him. He's that guy now. And I think he is going to be in for just a lot of opportunity. If anything, he's going to be in a lot of opportunity downhill, right down the field. So I do think that's going to carry over. He was also asked about the fullback, which I know everybody's like, oh, I want to know we're using a fullback. And he's like, well, we're training some guys. Now they didn't like keep a traditional fullback. Dwayne Martin would have been the guy, at least as of now. But they're going to train some guys there. And he did say like, oh, it's nice to have that guy. But if it doesn't happen, then essentially like you just don't use it, right? But it would be nice, it's nice to have that. So maybe we will see a little bit of some fullback usage. And again, that's not to say we didn't have it last year, because we did. It's just we didn't have a full back, right? We had Brock Wright lining there, and in the past we had Malcolm Rodriguez lining there. So we've used it over the years, even after Jason Cabinda. But just something to keep an eye on. I assume we're going to get some snaps at least of that at times, and we'll just have to see who that's going to be for the Lions. It'll probably be Brock Wright again, but we'll see. But we'll see. We got some tight ends there that the Lions brought in this offseason that also feel like that could potentially be a path for him. Thing that I liked about John Morton, and this thing that I always focus on, and it's not specific, kind of like I just hit on with the Saints idea, but it's always important. Like for me, it's always what I'm looking for. And I think, Ben Johnson, what they had to this offense opened me up to this, but it's the fact that offensively, it's you attack based on your opponent, right? So he basically laid it out like, hey, if we have a game where it's we're going to pass the ball a ton, and that's what makes sense. We'll do that. If we have to run the ball a ton, we'll do that. And that sounds like, oh yeah, it's obvious, but it's important. It's really important to not be the same team every week. This is our identity. This is what it has to look like. Like there can be an identity with a difference in game plans. And I thought that's always what was so fascinating with the Lions. And I think we started to see it a lot last year too. Defensively, they were so unique game by game. You never lost the, hey, we're a man team, we're aggressive. You never lost the identity, but you definitely had differences week by week. There were weeks where we did things that we just never did before. I always go back to Green Bay. We're running cover 3. We're running match coverage up to teams. Or you go to Indy, we're running cover 4. You're running palms looks in that game. You're doing things that you didn't do every week. It's not like this was a staple every week. It's just for that team we're doing this. And offensively, I think it's always important. Tampa Bay is always the best example. And it's not because it went well necessarily, but it's like, hey, you throw the ball a ton against Tampa Bay. We do it on early downs. Like those are just the examples of that. So I do always like to hear that. It always makes me feel calm because like that has to be your outlook on it. I believe it can't be like this is just who we are, because then you're just going to run into like this matched up well. We smoked that team. We matched up pretty poorly here. That was shaky. You always have to be willing to do that. And it also tests your ability, not only as a coaching staff, but as the roster that you actually have. Do you actually have that versatility? Because ideally you can do everything. And that's kind of what Casey Rogers hit on as well as the Lions' new defensive line coach. So we'll touch on Casey Rogers, how talented the team was, and why that was such an important factor for him coming here. He's like, yeah, that played a role. He also talked about how he's been with Todd Bowles for such a long time. And it's interesting because he didn't, by title alone, he didn't take a jump, right? He went to a different team, but he's still now the defensive line coach / defensive run game coordinator, which he was with Tampa Bay as well. So that it didn't take a jump. He's been in over the last few seasons, but going to a different opportunity, continuing to kind of learn, right? Because he felt like he had a really good sense of that Todd Bowles defense, and they were on the same page really well. He even mentioned the time when they were with the Jets, right? And he was the defensive coordinator at that time, and he kind of they knew each other so well that it wasn't like he was jumping in as the defense coordinator. It was like these guys are together all the time, so they kind of fit really well together. But now having an opportunity like this, he also did bring up the talent that we do have, which I'm not taking a shot at other teams because Tampa Bay drafts really well. So this is not just not what this is. But as I say that, I did point out in our Casey Rogers breakdown that talent, not necessarily like the development of talent, but truly more so of the adding talent, was legitimately a problem in places that he had been. And that's not me like trying to just like, oh yeah, of course it is what it is. It's not that he's coach. Like truly the additions that they made, the fall apart that they had with the Jets in terms of all the guys they lost on the front. And we did this all in the video, but the Jets, and then you go to Tampa Bay and their inconsistencies drafting over the past few years on the defensive front, like the high draft picks there, like that's a legitimate issue, so for Casey Rogers, like, I just thought of that when he said it a little bit. It's like, yeah, dude, I get it. Like, we understand. But he seems very excited about this. Everybody that talked about Marcus Davenport was on the same page, just like, just about him being healthy. Like, it's not a player thing. The guy's awesome. And even Casey Rogers was like, yo, the first 3 games, I think it was the first 3 games he played in, but like he was dominant. And they all kind of like mentioned, like, there's not all that you can do with it, but Davenport's been locked in. He's been there. All this stuff is basically voluntary, and Casey Rogers compared it to Tampa Bay, where it's like, hey, we won when we won the Super Bowl, it was like this as well in the offseason, where everybody's there, though it's voluntary, specifically with the coaching staff, but guys like Davenport, players like that they're in the building all the time, right? They're doing everything that they can. We'll just have to see if this actually kind of goes their way. But if they could potentially do things along the way to just be smart about the player, that could potentially prolong the season. Like that's ideal. The little nugget that he gave us was we need versatility. And the reasons that he needed versatility, and also to be disruptive, the reasons that he needed versatility to be disruptive is because if we want to play a game where we want to shake and bake, which is what he used, I didn't make that up. He said that, shake and bake. He took that from Ricky Bobby, but that's cool. He said if we want to shake and bake, we want to slug it out, we want to drop out, and he said, hey, we're not afraid to drop the big guys out. And you take those 3 things, right? You kind of like, okay, what is he talking about there? I think that's exactly what we talked about in the video, essentially. And I think that's what made Tampa Bay really good. Again, I don't think our defense is going to look as similar to the Tampa Bay stylistically. He's been talking about like there's things changing here. It's going to be different schematically because it will. Tampa Bay just was more of a 3-4. We're going to look closer to that Miami Dolphins team, right? When Cameron Wake was there. I think stylistically we'll look closer to that. But the idea of what all those teams had and the versatility they brought as well, but the idea that everybody really had was up front is like you have to be able to do those things because that's what made them so dangerous as a run defense specifically. Obviously, they blitzed like crazy, so there was still that aggression to it as well. Which just think about third downs, you stack everybody on the line of scrimmage. I don't know who's rushing, who's dropping. Having the willingness to drop certain guys that you typically look at as pass rushers, you don't want to do that a majority of the time, but doing it a few times that can add value, right, and creating confusion potentially there. But specifically, the two things of like, hey, shake and bake. I think of the agility of these interior players, right? These guys being able to move laterally. And that's where I talked about like, hey, a guy can show a gap and jump into another gap post snap. Having the movement skills to be able to move across and down the line of scrimmage. It also gives that flexibility to bump to different alignments that we are not just, hey, everybody's got to flip or you're stuck where you are. And it's like, depending on what the strength is, like we might be in some, like you don't want to do that. You want to be able to move and shift. And they're going to be able to do that. And then they can also play with a lot of different alignments if you have that flexibility, right? If you can shake and bake, as he said, because now some of my linebackers can play off of that. And then talking about David Correo, that's where he talked about having that, cohesion between the two groups. It's got to come together, right? It's got to unfold together. So everything's on the same page there. Defense line's doing this, linebackers got to be able to do this. It's just so many different ways you can attack gaps and you can attack people. And, the way that you can, okay, hey, let's pull people out of the box because they can handle multiple guys. Or let's go crazy. Let's shut down the run. Let's throw a lot of different looks at them. Let's make an offensive line that's not that athletic work. Let's make them chase guys into other gaps. Like things like that still work. And then there's also the ability to just slug it out, which is where you think about like, okay, hold your ground. Punch people at the point of attack, get upfield first, attacking single blocks, things like that. So having that versatility is key, but it's been a key wherever he's been. Stylistically, it hasn't always looked the same, right? Because different schemes, different players, different fits. But in terms of the versatility, they've always had that wherever he's been in some regard. And whenever they've had it, they've really, I feel like, leaned into it. Then where they didn't have it, they had something else where, they would just lean into something different or they'd have to adjust based on what they really had. But the versatility always mattered. It always mattered based on how they could align at the snap. Did they have to move guys at the snap, right? And then also I think about the depth. The depth always mattered a ton too because you have multiple guys that could do a lot of similar things that added a ton of rotation of value where it wasn't one guy taking all the snap. Take some footballs away this season, which is great. Specifically talk about Terrion, which was a surprise that Terrion didn't get a pick this last year. I mean, he had his chances. I think it was Minnesota, right? It was like the ball was like right in his lap and he dropped it. I think the quarterback threw it directly at him. It's good coverage. Right? I think he threw it directly at him and he dropped it. He had like 5 his last year at Alabama. Didn't get one this past season. He's going to get some. But Terrion Arnold and, kind of just like, if you think about it, he had 8 pass breakups this past season at 16th, and he's doing this in man coverage. Now, he got a ton of snaps, which plays into it as well, but 16th in the NFL in pass breakups, and he's playing a ton of man. It's hard to get interceptions there, but the patience that he showed, and I didn't ever feel that much like Terrion Arnold was pushing the envelope to like, let me go get the football. So I do feel like we did see that last year. Like, I don't remember like thinking like, oh, Terrion's doing way too much to try to get an interception here. He's not just doing his job. Like, I never really felt like that. At least early, and this sounds clearly like it could change. We know injuries will change things. Is that Rakestraw working majority now on the outside? They're letting him focus on the outside. Now, he played both in college. He played a majority on the outside, if I remember correctly, as a wide corner. But right now, the focus is leaving him at wide corner. So the interesting part of that is, of course, you have Terrion and you have DJ Reed. That means he wouldn't be a starter, even if performed really well there, very likely, unless he took like Terrion's spot or something. So he'd probably be a backup out wide, but that's where they want him to focus right now. And the focus, because of that, is Amik Robertson working in the slot, which, as Deshea Townsend brought up, was really his first full season in the slot. We had seen stretches in the past, but you had to go back. Like you had to find games. I remember like watching a game with him going against Keenan Allen like 3 years ago or something with the Chargers. Like there was games of it playing in the slot, but it wasn't his role. So I can't understand the excitement of like, well, what if we just leave him there? Because I think it was clear last year. I thought he looked better out wide. He's good at both. I thought he looked better out wide. But I could see where there's excitement of at least early in the stages, and we'll kind of see how it shakes out. But like, if we focus the guy on this spot, what does it look like for Amik? Because I think you always know you feel good that you have an ability to put Amik Robertson on the outside, and you know where you're going to get there. But like, man, if we focus him in the slot, what that's going to look like? Because he's never really had that focus. So I think that is exciting. And again, for Rakestraw's sake, that's what he mainly was in college. He was a wide corner. So it would be a focus for him as well. But ultimately, that's really the only thing they gave us. And then Avonte Maddox getting some snaps there. Specifically, he was brought up with Jim O'Neal working with the safeties. Sounds like, yeah, he's going to be playing some safety, but he may get some nickel reps. And of course, it's like, hey, if there was a scenario where Avonte was your best slot, and I don't think that'll be the case by when things start, but if that was the case, it's like, well, he is a backup. I mean, you could just start him, I guess. I mean, unless there was an injury, you could start him in the meantime. Speaking of safety, though, I thought the interesting answer here, nothing new. I mean, I feel like we've literally talked about all of these things, but at safety, like well, what is and this was the one, right, where they were like, what's the thing you're looking for the backup safety role? Because as Jim O'Neal brought up, like there's essentially one spot open, right? Like Avonte, Brian, and Kirby. We got like 5 guys to go fight for that spot. Who's going to shine? Hopefully both will do, because they could keep an extra guy there depending on how that plays out, especially with Avonte's flexibility. You could do that. But I think the biggest thing there is when he was asked, like, okay, well, what are you looking for from that safety position? And it was very straightforward: versatility. And that's always what we talk about for safety, because it's like you can't just do one or the other than this Lions defense, especially as a backup. But even as a starter, a lot of times they're still working towards that flexibility, right? They're still working towards that. Like Kirby was an amazing, you take the football away, but he's still working towards it. So as brought up by Jim O'Neill, he didn't feel like he missed an open field tackle when things, kind of popped this past year. And he's like, that was teaching tape, right? I'm saving that. But we also saw that he got a lot better in man coverage. So when injuries happen, he was better there. Brian Branch just has a unique flexibility to do that, play the run, play in this man coverage, but he can also play. He's got the range because he plays so fast. So versatility has always been key one. And I always start off, you think about Dan Jackson, is the instincts have to start there, right? Your willingness to tackle. And they feel like they have that with Dan. They brought up the zone coverage early. But then the next step is, that's what I thought Kirby's next step was, and Tracy tried it. It was like, where can we get to in man coverage? Like, can we be comfortable there? And that's what he said that they would be doing this offseason. So it's something to look for. Is he said, these safeties are going to get work against slot receivers, essentially in the offseason workouts. Like one-on-one, we're going to put them on slots just to see who can do it, right? Who's can be comfortable in this spot. And I truly do believe that whoever really excels there could be tapping there like, oh, this guy's going to stick around. And I think Lawrence Strickland's a great example of that, because Lawrence Strickland ended up doing that in the preseason. I think it's a huge reason why they said he's making the 53. If you think about it, Lawrence Strickland, while injuries played a part too, he was one of the surprises, I guess you could say, right? He was an undrafted free agent that actually stuck around with the Lions, made it through the 53-man cut with us again this year. But he started at safety and then he went to the nickel and he played it well. And it was like, he has that flexibility. So if a guy showcases that flexibility, that's going to mean a lot towards making the team as that next safety up. Something to definitely keep an eye on. We'll see if a guy like Strickland has taken another step there.
And if you think about the Lions safety room, the Lions have a lot of guys that are pretty comfortable in zone coverage spots. Think about how fast Will Norris plays when he's at single high safety, and he's shown some comfortability there as well. Eric Hallett has showed a lot of flexibility in terms of different safety alignments that he can play in coverage. And all of these guys do have the body type to be able to stand in and play the run, just like Dan Jackson as well. His willingness and run support, you wanted some things improved there technically speaking, but he's definitely willing as a run defender. For all of those guys, I look at the development of, okay, can they add some man versatility? Especially, like the Mo Norrises, can they add some of that value to their game? Because for the Lions, they like to interchange their safeties. There's a lot of movement post-snap. They'll send guys down and pick up in man coverage. So while you can lean into the strength, that just adds versatility. So speaking on the key of today's video, versatility takes off when you have guys that can do that.
Really the key there was kick returns, man. Kick returns, forcing more kickoffs. He did say that a lot of last year was Jake Bates maybe wasn't great at doing the kickoffs last year, which was noticeable. In the preseason, you're watching it, and I'm guilty. I thought a couple times, like, oh, maybe they're just like, is he doing that on purpose? Like, they were really bad. Like, it'd be really short. And you're like, that didn't even have a chance. And then they just kind of got away from it. And I didn't love it because I was like, man, we're just giving teams the 30-yard line. But he did kind of admit to, like, a huge part of that was Jake Bates, right? He didn't have a lot of that experience. It was his first year field goal kicking in the NFL. They wanted to focus on that. They didn't want to put that on his plate, so they played a little more of a conservative approach, and the analytics didn't say it necessarily value them to that extent, especially if there's inconsistencies there. So they kind of just decided not to worry about that. I was like, all right, just go touchbacks and keep moving. But this year is going to be a lot more of that. He says that he looks good. He says, he talked about Grant Stewart, which if you look at Grant Stewart, he played 340 snaps on special teams. He's always been a heavy special team snap guy. Think about Dylan Reeves-Maben, who the Lions aren't bringing back. Going to be in play a lot more this year. I'm very curious about who's going to be the kick returner, though. That's the thing I'm pretty fascinated by, because, like, I'm working on Dominic Lovett right now. Dynamicism with the ball. The problem is he doesn't have much creativity. Just as opposed to he's not very creative with the ball in his hands. But he is pretty good with, like, making the first guy miss by angles. And he's very quick to transition. I just wonder if, like, you feel like, hey, if we get him a seam, because he doesn't have much contact balance either. Like, if we could get him a seam, would that work? I don't know. I'll keep an eye on guys like that, but we know he played gunner and stuff like that. Draft picks as well. Like Dan Jackson was a huge part of special teams. Dominic Lovett as a gunner is a huge part of special teams. And from what I've seen so far, I think he's a better gunner than Tesla is, which is okay, because Tesla, I don't know how much he's actually played special teams. I think he's a better gunner than Tesla is, and I think mainly is because of his release. He's so quick and he's very reactive with his hands. Early movement, like, that's the sense that I get there. But anyways, we'll move on from that. We'll put that to the side for a second. Speaking of the receivers, how about Scotty Montgomery, who's the Lions' new receiver coach now? He talked about Tesla being poised. They threw a lot on his plate. He's looked poised so far. He's not going to have every route, essentially. Like Michael Thomas, he said, like 1,000 yards in his first year, but we didn't throw every route at him. It was like, let's master these and then we'll go from there. Excellent approach for a guy like Tesla. Like from the outside looking in, especially for him, I think that's a great approach. I do think he does some things really nicely in route running, right? Because he obviously has the hands, that kind of thing. But like if you let a player like that just master a few things of what they're going to do, especially because you're trying to throw like inside, outside, like so much that's just going to be on their plate that Morton was talking about. It's like, you just didn't do this in college. Like there's already so many things individually that you won't work on there. For our offense, man, I would want like limited. You don't want to have it so limited. Everybody knows he's out there, what he's doing, but like not putting everything, not asking everything upon him, having him in certain packages only, especially early, but even early, not even seeing him in early games. Like I could anticipate for the first few weeks, we'll see how fast it comes along, but I could absolutely anticipate for the first few weeks, this guy's not even seeing the field. There could be some inactives there. Like that wouldn't surprise me at all. I do think this is the right approach with Isaac Tesla. And I did feel like this year, it could be a slow burn with Tesla. Like it could be back of the year. And when he gets on the field, he'll flash. But I thought, and I think a reason that those two things will come together ultimately is because they're taking the right approach. As far as David Correo, who is the Lions outside linebackers coach now, but he's also the senior defensive assistant for the Lions, kind of mentioned like we wouldn't see things change dramatically, but like, hey, everybody sees the game a little bit differently. So from that perspective, some things may be different with Kelvin Shepherd a little bit here, mainly outside of like everybody's kind of going to be involved, so everybody kind of understands the full outlook. And he brought up Miles Adams. He's like, well, Miles Adams was like, hey, I never even knew what that kind of drop was. Yeah, okay. So that's having everybody kind of involved, same meaning. I actually love that approach, by the way, of everybody kind of understanding the full picture, at least to some extent, because it does to me add more of a responsibility feel to it. Like not only are you all part of it, but it focuses your responsibility on like, yo, if I don't do my job, why I need to do this for that guy behind me or the guy in front of me, because now I can understand the consequence a little bit better. Your impact, like even you feel your value, I think a little bit more when you're kind of involved with. The last thing I'll leave y'all with, and I thought this was great because we've talked about this a few times, it's Derek Barnes. And we've talked about like, oh man, trying to replace Derek Barnes last year was difficult. And we tried a lot of guys in that role. I actually think Malcolm Rodriguez did a really solid job in that spot. I thought towards the end of the year, Trevor Nowoski was able to handle some of that role. So like we were able, it's not like we're like, oh man, like we can get it done. But I thought the big thing there that they talked about specifically was he kind of laid it out as like Derek Barnes is so unique. Like the idea of you being able to have a backup that can do what Derek Barnes can do in every spot is very unlikely, because essentially if you had that guy, he'd be starting too. Like you're finding a way to get that guy on the field too, that can play over the slot, can play on the line, can play off ball, can blitz from the inside. Like if you have that guy, then he's probably starting somewhere on your team. More sense, right? Because we all know that it was like very difficult. It's like, dude, there's just not Derek Barnes out there. And I think they kind of settled that. Like, yeah, there's just not, though. That dude's unique, right? He's special, and he gets better every year. Derek Barnes is awesome. I'm glad he got the big extension that he did there. I've really seen from him, this is happening. I only see his X stuff. He doesn't post that much on X, at least from what I've seen. It's really just like him reposting like analytics of how good he is. that's pretty much it. And then he had like a post recently where he was like, it was like respect is earned or something. Like, I don't know, respect is due or something. And it was like him working out. That's really all I've seen from Alex. We didn't get a comment from Sean Dion Hamilton whether or not he's actually there right now, like or participating in the offseason stuff. He said, ask Dan Campbell about that. I understand it. You don't want to get in on that. But Kelvin Shepherd was not worried about it. He's like, I have no concerns about Kelvin. That stuff they'll handle, right? He can handle that with those guys. But for my room, he's a leader, and he had no concerns about Alex Anzalone entering this last year of his contract. Now, Alex means a ton to this team. And all the graphics that he posts are very legitimate. Like, he is one of the best man coverage linebackers. He posted a graphic that he played more man coverage than everybody. Now, Malcolm was like third because we just do that a lot, but he does play it more than everybody else, and he's really good in that category. All the advanced numbers, the separation given up, like everything says that he's really good in these spots, and I think that did make the Lions defense special this past year because it's hard to have dudes, and we didn't have guys like that, and he also offset Jack Campbell so well because of that skill set. So I don't know what they're going to do long-term here with Alex Anzalone. I really have no idea. I think this I don't really see anything coming early, to be honest with you. So as long as he's going to play this year and you're good there, which I assume that he will, that decision to me will very likely be made after the year. I don't see something or see a decision there being made early. But in terms of the draft, the Lions didn't touch that position. They have Mel Rodriguez, who is definitely the closest thing to what he can add as a backup in coverage, who's really good. I thought he took big steps last year. He's the closest thing. So they feel comfortable with that. Big Alex Anzalone guy, right? This was like the one guy I think that actually signed when this regime first came in that I was like, I'm not gonna say the one guy that we signed that I was fired up about, but he was the guy before we signed him, right? We had to did a video on because all the connections there just made sense. So I'm hoping he sticks around, whatever fashion that is. But for this year especially, we're gonna need him.